I just want to welcome everyone here to the Tuckahoe Public Library for our special event for the holidays. We're ending 2010 on a good note with our author, Francesco Clark. Thank you so much for coming. And afterwards, we'll have books that Francesco wrote, and also we'll have some refreshments, so please don't run out.
I don't think I can.
You know,
Yeah. Thank you for coming. With this snow and the slush and the wind and tornadoes and Dorothy and everything. I don't know what's going on outside, but thank you for coming. It means a lot to me. It took me about 2 years to write Walking Papers, and it's not a very long book, so but it was kind of all of me that went into writing this. So it was one of the most difficult yet therapeutic and cathartic experiences that I've had my entire life. Kind of starting from, originally I started from before I had my spinal cord injury in 2002, and I kind of touched upon what my life was like in New York. I worked in publishing, I worked in magazines, kind of the very typical life that a 22, 23, 24-year-old might have. And then I wanted to juxtapose that position with suddenly being underwater in a pool, unable to move, unable to breathe, and then being in the ICU, having got there from using in a helicopter, and being told that you were going to die 6 times in one night. So the juxtaposition of, the vibrancy of your younger 20s in New York, feeling invincible, to not being able to breathe, or looking at your fingers and not being able to move them, or looking at your arms and not being able to move them. It was just a very stark kind of experience, and that's kind of what I wanted the book to thrust upon you when you first started reading it. Also the title, I wanted it to be very active, but I wanted it kind of to depict where my life was going. So I wanted it to be something that would depict kind of an action, but be simple and kind of understanding it. So typically what I do is I'll read a chapter, and then you can ask questions. You can interrupt me if you have questions, but we always do Q&A after. And there's nothing is off limits. So however you guys want, any questions you want to ask me is fine. So the chapter that Caitlin and I selected, this is Caitlin, is called I Sing, Therefore I Breathe. And just to preface this chapter, I was in the ICU at SUNY Stony Brook, and I was there for about 9 days, and while I was in the ICU, I was on a ventilator, and I was told I would never breathe on my own for the rest of my life, and that I would never move anything on my own. My arms never speak on my own. My left vocal cord was paralyzed. My left lung was completely collapsed. Everything was very bleak. My father's a doctor, and so one of the first things that I instinctively kind of did was to fight back. And everything that was told to me, I took with a grain of salt. So while I was told, you're probably going to die tonight, there was no doubt in my mind I was going to live. So I was kind of like, well, that's not true. You're probably not going to move anything for the rest of your life. And I was kind of like, I don't know. And then my mom looked at me and she was like, move something. I don't care what you move, just move something. So I started to twitch my shoulder a little bit. And it kind of set the tone for the rest of my recovery from that point on. because it was all about defying expectations and I don't know, doing it in a fun way. So in the ICU, I had a speech therapist that gave me the most boring exercises that I had to do for about 2.5 hours, where I had to breathe into this tube and make this little ball kind of float in a cup. And it's just, I don't know. I guess it serves its purpose. It's not for me. I couldn't do that for 2 hours every day. So instead, my sister Charlotte and my best friend Alex came in one day with a CD player and speakers. And Charlotte had the best of ABBA with her. And they kind of walked in one day and they were like, sing. So this is kind of how my recovery began. I sing, therefore I breathe. I remained in the intensive care unit for the next 10 days. I still have nightmares about my time there. The bare room, the metal bed, the sterile smell of the ward, and most of all the noises. In the next room, I could hear a man repeatedly crying out and pleading to die. These weren't the kind of sounds a person would make in reaction to pain. They were deeper, lower, bestial, impossible to ignore. The nights were the most difficult for me because I would fall asleep early in the evening and wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning to the wails of my neighbor. The nurses mostly ignored him. What else could they do? Each time I began to drift into sleep, the moans would startle me back to consciousness, reminded me exactly where I was and what had happened to me. My life was still in balance. In the days after the operation, I was tethered to my bed by 24 hours a day, with a tube in my throat, unable to speak. My left lung had collapsed completely in the swimming pool after taking in all that water, which meant I couldn't breathe without the ventilator tube going into my throat. This tube, which was hooked up to a machine that inflated and deflated my lungs, was the most difficult aspect of the entire ICU experience. The intense pressure the intubation exerted on my throat caused me to constantly gag and panic. While I would scream, unlike my neighbor, I couldn't make as much as a moan. I could think to myself, I want to move, but I could not move. Every impulse to move remained, to turn or to reach or to sit or to stand, but I couldn't follow through. Besides my ability to just move above my shoulders, my range was nil. The numbness extended from just below my shoulders downward. The rest of my body was gone from me. The only parts I could feel were the insides of my elbows and armpits, where the swelling in my spine had caused certain nerves to become acutely sensitive. Even the touch of a cotton swab would feel like the jab of a pencil. Even 3 months after leaving the hospital, if one of the physical therapists grabbed me under my armpits, it would feel like a knife was slicing through my skin. My family was at my bedside constantly. My mom was there every minute of every night. My dad came after his day at the practice. My sister relieved my mom so she could grab a few hours of sleep during the day. They were doing what people do when they're in shock, trying to help while constantly coming against their own helplessness. They could do little except stay with me, hold my lifeless hand, offer what they could. The only way for me to communicate with them was by blinking or darting my eyes in my sockets. I could clench and unclench my jaw. I could raise my eyebrows, I could shed tears, I could move my eyeballs. All I could blink was my eyelids. 1 blink for yes, 2 blinks for no. That was it. I was desperately trying to process what had happened to me. I could no longer feel or command my body, and I think my subconscious was reacting by assuming I had died. Every night, I dreamt I was dying. I dreamed I was drowning, I dreamed I had no legs. I would wake up frantic, unable to scream or move. I remained like this on life support for the next 9 days, attached to a tangle of tubes, lines, and wires via every part of my body. I had a feeding tube going up my nose into my stomach. There was a catheter tube going into my bladder. I had 2 IVs in each arm, another tube that went under my collarbone, dosing me with medication. I had a sensor on my finger that monitored the oxygen levels in my blood, a hard plastic neck brace holding my neck absolutely still, and various sensors attached to my chest and arms, measuring my heart rate. At times I would weep from the shock and fear of helplessness. I couldn't feel or breathe or talk. Any way of connecting with the world was shut down. There were moments when I didn't understand why I should go on. I knew that I was one breath away from death, and only the ventilator was keeping me alive. There were so many tubes coming out of my body, so much electricity involved in my survival, that I barely felt human anymore. The doctors had told me that I was never going to move again. And was it really worth all this effort? What was the point in continuing? Wouldn't it be easier to give up? My family was the only reason I didn't succumb to such thoughts. They were fighting for me. They were doing anything they could to help. My mom smelled the essential oils they were using to massage my arms and legs to keep my circulation flowing. My mom called the Christopher Reeve Foundation and found out that I should be getting methylprednisolone, a steroid that decreases swelling in the spine and increases healing. My dad was on the phone to colleagues in the medical community, finding out research trials in Israel and across Europe. A doctor in Germany told him, "Well, think about it. I'll come up with something." It was the first glimmer of hope. My mother was calling everyone she knew, telling them to pray for me. I had rabbis, Methodists, Presbyterians, Catholics, Unitarians, all praying for me, any religion. After 2 days, to my relief, I was told that the intubation tube was going to be removed to see if my body could take over and breathe on its own. My mom and sister were there with me. We were informed that it was likely that I would still have difficulties breathing and would have to be put back in the ventilator right away. I knew I wanted to do everything in my power to prevent that tube from being put back in. And when it was finally out, I inhaled and spoke my first words, "Oh, thank God." The sound I made was barely a rasp, but at least it was a sound. My throat was raw, swollen, and sore, and it hurt to swallow. And when I did try to vocalize, only the faintest noise came out. I didn't care. That tube was gone and I was still breathing. It felt so good to make some sort of sound, even one that was barely audible, because it proved I was alive. It gave me a lot of comfort to think that if the doctor was wrong about the ventilator, he was probably wrong about the rest of his prognosis. Soon after this, I began a little more sensation back into my arms and shoulders. I was so happy I cried. I was too weak to move much, but it was a starting point for me, something positive for me to focus on. The same week, my brother and his wife Valerie came back from their trip. They had been on vacation at the time of my accident on a cruise, and my parents had decided to keep the news from them until they returned. What good would it do for them to know what had happened to me when they were stuck on a ship? When they found out, they came immediately to the hospital. Mike was distraught. "I should have been there for you," he insisted. "I feel so bad, I didn't know." Here was my big brother, 7 years older than me, usually so calm and in control. I could only imagine what it was like for him and the rest of my family to see me hooked up to all these machines. If it were one of them in the bed instead of me, I didn't think I would be able to bear it. With the little voice I had, I told him to forget about it. "Me being here is not your fault," I said. "Mike, you're here now," my sister told him. "Let's focus on getting Francesco better." This is how we thought about it, right from the beginning. How can Francesco get better? Now that my brother was back, he joined my sister and parents in taking shifts at my bedside. There was always somebody there. Every member of my family was helping to connect me to myself, so that I could find the strength to begin the slow fight for recovery. I needed my family most at night. The psychological and physical shock to my body after my injury and operation was so complete that it had carried through to all parts of my consciousness and subconsciousness. My dreams were... One night I dreamt I was walking along the sidewalk in Manhattan. It was sunny, cool and breezy, perfect kind of late September day. I was walking to work briskly. In my dream, I was midway to the office, turning the corner onto a side street as the wind blew against my face. But then my legs suddenly began to feel heavy, and I struggled to keep my pace. As I looked down, I saw that my feet and legs were turning gray, morphing into the sidewalk, transforming from flesh and blood into stone. The cement began crawling up my body. Soon I was engulfed. It was going to suffocate me, and I didn't know what to do. I screamed out for help, but I was completely alone. I couldn't explain what was happening to me. I only knew that I must either escape it or go mad. When I woke up from the dream, I was yelling, gasping for air. My mother, drowsing in her chair next to my bed, startled. "I'm here, don't worry. You're here," she told me, leaning over me, caressing my hair. But I was scared to death. Waking up from a bad dream to find out I was in the ICU was a nightmare come true. Every night I would fall asleep and wake up screaming, relying on my family to restore me to myself. Several times when I awoke, I had to ask whether I had arms or legs. I no longer knew what was real. It was as if my body was continuing to send messages to my brain, but these messages were so jumbled and unclear that my brain was reacting by assuming that I had died. If nights were bad, the days were not much better. At intervals during the day, a nurse would have to come and suction my lungs. I had lost the ability to use any of the muscles around my ribs. This meant I was physically unable to cough, and because I couldn't cough, I couldn't expel the phlegm and liquid in my lungs, so they would begin to pool in my chest, preventing me from breathing deeply enough for my body to get the necessary oxygen. When my blood oxygen levels fell below a certain number, a godforsaken machine, I hated that machine, attached to a sensor on my body, beeped ferociously, and a nurse would rush to my bedside to begin that dreaded suctioning. This involved preparing a foot-long plastic tube and feeding it up my nose, down my throat, and into my lungs. If the tube didn't reach my lungs, which many times it did not because of my gag reflex, the nurse would have to try again, sometimes 3 or 4 times until it went in. Try to breathe in deeply when the tube reaches the back of your throat. Don't try to swallow or else the tube will go down towards your stomach instead of into your lungs. Easier said than done. All I could do was nod my face as it turned red, my eyes tearing up from pain. Once the tube was inside my lung, the nurse would turn the suction device on and extract as much liquid as she could through the tube. The most difficult part of this procedure was that I couldn't breathe during the extraction. The suctioning became the most hated part of the day. By the end of the second day, the roof of my mouth had become so swollen and irritated that even whispering was impossible. I declared war on the blood oxygen machine. I would do anything. I just didn't want it to beep again. But beep it did. On one particular occasion, a nurse came to suction me, but I didn't recognize her. As soon as she inserted the tube, I felt something catch in my throat, and I knew this felt wrong. Normally the suctioning hurt, but this time I was in agony. I turned my head violently to one side, then the other, fighting to free myself. I tried to scream, at which point the nurse turned to me and said, "Shut up. Stay still. Let me suction your lungs." So she turned the suction machine on, but the end of the hollow tube was caught on my throat. Looking at the tube, I could see the liquid inside was reddening with blood. The nurse grew even more annoyed and pulled the tube out, shaking her head as if this were my fault. My parents asked that I was never to be treated or seen by that nurse again. I am certain she caught my vocal cord, because after she had finished with me, the little bit of voice that I had was almost completely lost. Other times, the nurses would perform what they called chest PT. Apparently, the PT stood for physical therapy. In practice, this involved wrapping an oxygen mask over a fist to suction the blow, to cushion the blow, then hitting my back several times each day to try to loosen the phlegm from my lungs. Even so, it was difficult for me to cough strongly enough to expel anything much. I soon discovered that although I couldn't cough, I could do other things that would help get the phlegm out of my lungs. For instance, I could scream, albeit faintly and fairly quietly due to my sore throat. The more I screamed, the more this seemed to clear my passages. But after hearing the man in the neighboring room yell and moan for his life to end, I thought that screaming would be annoying to the nurses and to him. So instead, I sang. I sang horribly and as loudly as I could. I discovered that not only did my singing help clear my lungs, it passed the time too. I was in bed in the same room without being able to move or leave, not even go to the bathroom. Television became very boring very quickly, and I never cared for the morning shows or soap operas anyway. Reading was nearly impossible because I was attached to so many tubes and machines. I couldn't move my arms or sit up and keep a book on my lap. Remembering the words and tunes of my favorite songs became a form of entertainment. There's absolutely no way you're going to be able to sit still without doing something, no way, my sister pointed out. And so singing became what I did, although my pitiful little frog voice sounded like a Muppet on helium. Charlotte and my friend Alex, whom I've known since 6th grade, provided me with necessary equipment for my bad karaoke habit: a CD player and a stack of CDs. First up was a soundtrack to Mamma Mia. It actually worked quite well. I put the CD on repeat, started singing, and managed to go a full 4 hours without the blood oxygen machine beeping. Encouraged by my progress, I decided to keep going. I sang so long, that the nurses actually started requesting their favorite numbers. They would come in and put a CD in the player, and as they would leave, they would just say, "Sing." One nurse remarked, "Your poor neighbor, if he wasn't screaming for his life to end last night, I think the sound of your singing might just kill him." Well, maybe I can belt out something that will calm him down, a melody? Highly unlikely. Don't put him in a coma on my ship. That poor man. But I like the fact that I found a way to make the nurses smile. They would stop in to chat for a while. They would go back to whatever it is that they were doing. This made me feel almost human. I had regained my voice, and people were listening and reacting to me. I was no longer only a body full of tubes, hoping to get better. I was getting better, and people would stop into my room, not because I was crying out with pain, but because I was making a fool of myself. I didn't know it at the time, but by singing, by becoming up with my own way of clearing my lungs, I had taken the first tiny yet proactive step on a very long road ahead of me. So this chapter is very enigmatic of my recovery since then. And I don't think anything of even the way that I decided to write the book was traditional or standard fare. Kind of, I had to take into account a level of fun and a level of kind of whimsy in the physical therapy that I do every day. I do about 5 hours of therapy every day. But it's, karaoke therapy. It's stupid. A lot of it sounds dumb, but it actually ended up working better than the therapy that I was supposed to be doing at the hospital. So so that was kind of the first step in my recovery when I was in the ICU. I don't know. Do you have any questions?
When did this happen to you?
June 1st of 2002. It was a pool diving accident, and it was an above ground pool that was built but looked like an in-ground pool. So the deck was built up, and those metal ring ladders that they normally have? They actually put those in the shallow end of the pool, and that's supposed to be in the deep end of the pool. So when I saw that, I thought it was a deep end. I dove in, and the second that I dove in, my chin hit the bottom of the pool.
That was
And-
during the day, that night?
No, it was at night.
It had to
It
be
was-
at night.
Yeah.
It was an above-ground pool.
It was an above ground pool, yeah. Yeah, and the lights inside were broken in the pool.
Where was this?
Long Island.
In a house? Somebody's house?
Yes. Yeah, I had been there for about 3 hours.
Well, you're the only one.
I was the only person there, yeah, when I dove in. I was sharing the house, it was a timeshare, with friends of friends of friends of friends, so they were complete strangers. And it was Memorial Day weekend, it was a perfect night. Kind of just one of those, you know, your first day of vacation when you just want to relax. And, you know, there's this pretty pool at the house and you wanted to go swimming. And I'd been swimming my entire life. So I know how to dive and would know.
So you
know,
dove, that was the first mistake, diving.
Yeah.
If you had just gone down the ladder, you would have realized.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is that there's so many what ifs. And that's what you're left with a lot of times when, after the injury, there was a lot of what if. You know, what if I hadn't done this? What if I hadn't done that? And then it becomes, you know, at 3 in the morning, it starts to feel like, well, what did I do wrong? And it starts to feel almost like, what did I do to deserve this? But then at the same token, you realize that you didn't do anything to deserve this. It was an accident. And you have to kind of make the best of your life. And going into, there's something that many people often say is, and I know that they mean it with good intentions, is, do you think this happened for a reason? And I think oftentimes when people ask that to somebody maybe who has a terminal illness or an injury like mine, they're not left with the repercussions of that question. So when I wake up at 2 in the morning, or when I would wake up at 2 in the morning, dying of thirst, and there would be a glass of water that would be 5 inches from the grasp of my hand, and me not being able to get it, that's when you start to really ask that question again. And, you know, do you think this happened for a reason? And at 2 in the morning, when I would want to just have a little sip of water, but I couldn't get it at 24 years old, it almost makes you wonder, well, what was my reason? And it's such an open-ended question, and there didn't seem to be an answer at first. So I kind of had to learn to come up with my own answers to those kinds of questions.
Who discovered you in the pool then?
One of
You
the
were alone.
housemates actually heard a noise, and by luck came downstairs, and I was in, it was 3 feet of water, and I was completely conscious, face down, and I could see the bubbles of water, of air coming up from my mouth. But when I was first paralyzed, it didn't dawn on me that I could die. I was angry. I was angry at myself, and it was more like as if my mother were scolding me. So it felt like, you're such an idiot. Don't you know how much work you're gonna have to do? From seeing everything, you know, because we all know what a spinal cord injury means after seeing Christopher Reeve struggle in the news. And so it's very obvious to everyone what it means to have a spinal cord injury. So I was angry with myself. But at the same time, I never thought that I was going to die. Although I was underwater for almost a minute, and then at the end of that minute being underwater, I was like, well, I can't move anything and I'm underwater, so how's this going to work? And then I was kind of lifted up out of the water.
It's 9 years. 9 years?
Yes, 9 years.
And you're And when did you start to, be the way you are now, able to talk and do all sorts? When did that happen? How
Well, the
progressively?
singing, I started to talk when I started to sing in the ICU. So, but it was almost like an inaudible whisper. And then my voice really came back about 8 months after that. And then I started to twitch my shoulders about 9-10 months after my injury. And then I started to kind of move my arms a year or so after, but it wouldn't be normal movements. It would be very kind of jagged, be able to do anything functional. Last year, I started to get back, I got back my wrist movements. And then the last couple of months, I started to be able to use my triceps and punch and pronate and supinate my arms. And now I'm kind of always wiggling around in my chair because I'm starting to feel my butt. And it's like I'm sitting through the longest movie ever and I just want to like stand up and get out of this position. So I'm always seeing progress, which is great. And that was unforeseen with anybody with this kind of injury. Everybody, the medical community always said once you have an injury like this, you're not going to get better. You're not.
Did you stand? You were able to stand holding on?
I don't stand on my own, but I do stand. I have a device called a standing frame. So I go from sitting to standing using that. And before I could only do that for about 20 minutes. And then I felt like I would faint, but now I can stand for an hour and 20 minutes or so.
That's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yes.
Initially, in the medical field, they didn't give you the greatest prognosis. What do the physicians say to you now?
Yeah, actually, that's the most one of the most interesting things that I've seen in the 8.5 years that I've been injured is the incredible difference and this incredible kind of shift in the way that medicine has changed. Now, the doctors, I'm doing a research study with MIT and Cornell at Berkeley, where they put my hands and my arms in these robotic devices and I do these virtual reality exercises. And in doing so, in doing an exercise with my right arm, they noticed for 9 weeks that my left arm actually got better. And what that's proving is that it's not retraining the muscles, but it's retraining my brain and my spinal cord and my central nervous system, which means that the nerves are regrowing. And so in doing the ASIA exam, ASIA stands for American Spinal Cord Injury Association. It's this kind of standard exam they give to everybody who had an injury like mine or a stroke. I went from a complete cervical level 4 ASIA A, which is kind of like the most severe. ASIA A is the most severe. B, C, D, E, F is normal. ASIA A to C5, I went down 1 vertebrae, ASIA C, which means I have movement and feeling below my level of injury all the way down to my toes. And they were kind of like, we don't know why you're getting better or what you're doing to get better, but do whatever you're doing. And I'm kind of like, I'm doing everything, so whatever, yeah.
Do they ever feel that it was not just that it was more of a spiritual intervention to have you reach to the point where you are now?
I think that it depends on who you speak with about that. But I know the way that I am, it's part of my recovery is just who I am. So, yeah, spirituality is very important to me. I mean, in terms of religion, I was raised Catholic, but I think I identify most with the Buddhist mentality, which almost you realize your faults, but you try to be better. It's almost like you try to be a better version of yourself, but you could never see yourself as being a perfect person because nobody can be perfect, kind of thing. So, but I learned that a lot too through the injury. Yeah.
There's a will, there's a way.
Yeah.
Do Did you say you went to Burke? You were Burke, the facility, Burke?
Yes, I was there today.
So you go there on a regular basis?
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah, I go there every day. I've been involved with their research studies for about 2.5 years.
They do beautiful things there. I had to meet when I went for rehab. I visited the second floor. I thought, maybe.
Yeah, I did. I mean, you name it, I've been there. I was a patient at Mount Sinai, then I went to Kessler, did the research treadmill study at Kessler. Then I went to Burke. You know, most of the rehab that I do is at home in the garage.
Therapist.
Yeah. Most of it is without therapists. I do on my own.
Do it on your own.
Yeah. That's the other thing, is that you have to learn to juggle the whole insurance game and paying for everything. Just, if you had a therapist there, you know, 3 or 4 hours a day, you can,
Nah, that's true. Yeah.
you know, I mean, Donald Trump can't afford that. You have to learn how to figure out how to
Money
do
from
things on your
everybody.
own. Yes.
Do you have any contact, or have you ever met Stephen McDonald, the patrolman, police officer who had a spinal cord, who was shot many years
In New
ago?
York.
And he is paralyzed. We
McDonald.
recently were at a lecture of probably about a year ago at St. Eugene's Church, and he's a dynamic man, just like you are.
I went to a healing mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral 4 years ago, and he was the speaker. And I spoke to him briefly afterwards, and that's the only interaction that I had with him. But yeah, he is actually he has so much energy behind everything that he does, and is so driven, and I don't know, he just seems unstoppable, because every time you hear about him, he's always doing something that's bigger and better than what you thought was already bigger and better that he had previously done. So, yeah.
Why don't you mention Clark's Botanicals?
Oh, right. Okay, so one of the things that started for my injury was Clark's Botanicals. And it's a business that I started. It's a skincare line that I started after sustaining my injury. And one of the side effects of my spinal cord injury is that my skin doesn't react to hot and cold. So I don't sweat when I get hot. I only sweat if I'm in a lot of pain, for example. So because of that, my skin, it was almost like anything that could go wrong with my skin started to go wrong with my skin. I would break out, it would turn gray, it looked like it was aging. I got rosacea, but it wasn't reacting to other creams that you could buy, and I was using prescription, over-the-counter, anything. This was also a point in my life when I was doing about 6 or 7 hours of therapy every day. I was doing therapy at home, getting, in the van, going to Kessler in New Jersey every day, doing the treadmill study, then doing 2 hours of therapy there, coming back here, then doing 2 more hours of therapy here. And I basically had gone into my shell after my injury because I was in shock. And I wanted to not be noticed. I didn't want people to look at me. I didn't want people to talk to me. I didn't want, mainly because I didn't want people to worry about me. And there was this sense of guilt that you feel, what you put your family through. And then imagining if this had happened to your mother, or this had happened to your sister or your brother, what would it feel like? And thinking about that is just, it's beyond. Dealing with it myself, I can deal with it. But imagining it on somebody else, it's unbearable even for me to comprehend. So, one morning on the way to Kessler, a friend of the family came in, and he would drive me. And he walked in and he said, "Oh, did you hear what happened?" "No. Christopher Reeve just passed away."
Ugh.
And I was kind of like, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Yeah, Superman just passed away. They announced it on the news." And I'm just sitting there like, I don't believe them. How did this I don't believe anything that he's saying right now. So we get in the van, and he turns on the news, and they don't really talk about very much. They're talking about the weather or traffic or whatever. And then they mentioned briefly that he had passed. But it's like I wanted to know everything. I wanted to know how did he pass away, what happened, what time, you know, why didn't we know anything about this yesterday, the day before, something like that. Because he was my hero. I mean, this was somebody that I looked up to even before I had my injury. And so it felt like the longest car ride ever from here to New Jersey. And we get there, and everybody at Kessler already knew, and it was just dead quiet when we got there. And one of the therapists we were just all in shock. And I was doing therapy on a mat, and, you know, I couldn't wrap my head around his passing, but the thing is that there wasn't much more for me to understand. He was gone. And he was such an advocate for anybody with a disability. He was such an advocate for medical research, I mean, you name it, he was always out there fighting and talking and meeting. So, I basically had realized that I wanted to be part of the cure, like he was, because suddenly Superman didn't have my back anymore. So I wanted to become part of who he was. And I didn't want to be so passive as to just do therapy all day long. I wanted to become more of an advocate. And in doing that, a very subtle shift kind of happened in my thinking. I wanted to be more vocal. I didn't want to be this wallflower anymore. I didn't want people to ignore me anymore. I wanted people to see me, but to look beyond the wheelchair and just to see me and want to talk to me for who I am. And so, ironically, that's when my appearance started to become a little bit more important to me. I wanted the way that I look to be the way that I felt. And the way that I felt was strong, outgoing, and happy. So I wanted to look that way. And it seems sometimes it can seem kind of stupid, because when you think of beauty, you think of something that can seem very shallow and can seem very frivolous. But for me, it was the opposite. It was something that helped me to regain my sense of purpose and my sense of balance in doing 5 hours of therapy every day, but then also doing something else that benefits medical research. That, you know, when we have a 16-year-old, you know, young woman buying our lip tint, she then reads about the product line and she knows what a spinal cord injury is. And she's donating money to research and buying the lip tint. It's more than just a lip balm, it's more than just an eye cream, it's almost becoming synergistic on a different level. And using something that normally would be frivolous, not be frivolous. So that's kind of like how the business started. And we launched, actually, Patricia's here, Patricia Margro. She has a store in Bronxville, and she was the first store to launch Arts Botanicals in her store. So,
one of my most successful lines, skincare lines. Yeah, it's brilliant. Very good. Everything works exactly the way it says that it's going to work, and it's all on packaging. It'll tell you exactly what it is and exactly how it's going to work, and it does exactly what it says it's going to do. It's really a brilliant line.
And what is the store?
My store is Maison Rouge in Bronxville.
Where is that?
they're-
Pondfield?
Pondfield. But I am very honored to have the line in my store. It's amazing.
But it was kind of serendipitous in the way that Patty and I met, because her nephew had a brain injury a year after I had my
Just
injury?
before.
Oh, a year before I
Just
had my
before.
injury. And she lives, 5 blocks away from me. So it was kind of, and we have a lot of mutual friends, and so a lot of with the research that I was doing about my recovery, she was doing as her nephew's caretaker, caregiver. And I don't know, it just felt like my life has always been like an interesting turn of events and a good coming together of some sorts.
Can you speak a little on stem cell research, because I believe you had some.
Yes, yeah, stem cell research. I had a surgery in China in 2004, and they took embryonic stem cells but converted them to glial cells. Glial cells you naturally have in your body, and glial cells help your axons grow in your spine. They're also in your brain. So glial cells grow, theoretically would grow these hollow sheets of myelin in your spine, and then there's a chemical message inside this myelin that would tell the axons to grow through them. I had the surgery on June 30th of 2004, and I was in surgery for 8 or 9 hours, and when I got out, after I awoke, I could feel my ribs. And I felt like I was naked, so I was always rubbing my ribs. But the sensation you get back is hypersensitive. And now it feels normal. It just feels like your ribs. But what I noticed with the surgery from China is that I wouldn't notice something for about 8 weeks, and then I would notice something else would come back. And then just when I would get bored or frustrated, another muscle would come back. And then, and it always felt normal. You know, because it was so funny, because I would think, well, what is it going to feel like to feel my stomach again? What is it going to feel like to feel my back again? It just feels normal. When you get it back, you're like, oh, it's supposed to feel like this. And then you're just like, oh, well, then you go back to sleep. Because that's what happened. Like, a lot of times I would wake up and I would realize that I could feel something new, and then I would just go back to sleep. And then I would forget to tell my mom or my dad, and I would wake up and be like, oh, I forgot to tell you, I could feel my ribs. And then I go back to bed, and they'd be like, what? So, I think that, having said that, the surgery in China maybe was 3% of my recovery. Most of my recovery has been the 5 hours of physical therapy that I do every day. I mean, the stem cells will give you that extra push, and you know, because you physically have to grow these axons through scar tissue in your spine. But they also they won't grow, and they don't have a reason to grow unless you stimulate them. So it really is kind of going back to how a baby learns how to crawl, how to sit up, how to walk, how to feel. You have to relearn how to feel. There's a lot of sensory kind of modalities that I had to do in order to do that. But it's interesting to see now how there's a new therapy that they just did research on using your own stem cells, adult stem cells, where they derive neural stem cells from your own blood, and they add growth factors to them, and then they re-inject them back into you. And they're doing studies on that, and it's working very well in the preliminary tests. But that's the thing, working with Patricia Stush, actually is a good friend of mine from the Christopher Reeve Foundation, and she's here. And one of the, besides from being, such an honor of working with the foundation, but one of the great things that I've learned in working with them is seeing how collaborative a lot of the research and scientists are today. And seeing how, this groundbreaking research they did in China 6 years ago actually is connected to so many new discoveries that seem like have nothing to do with China, but they really build upon each other. And one of the things, and I've noticed this in the past 3 years, is it's hard to say for anything, for any type of cancer, for anything. There'll be a cure in 5 years, or 10 years, or 3 years. Because when you start to make one discovery, it builds upon the other, and the other, and the other, and it becomes exponentially quicker and stronger. So to forecast and say, okay, you know, we're probably going to do this in this amount of time. It's nice to do that, but I always like to push the envelope even more and say, well, how about half that? You know, I mean, considering everything that we've done in the past 2 years that we expected to do in 5, why would we go along this slow timeline? And I think it's important to, you know, to push those buttons sometimes.
My question was just for that to make people aware that there is not just embryonic stem cells.
Oh, there's everything.
But
Yeah.
there are other methods that we should be certainly.
And I agree with that, because I feel like, you know, everybody has a right to their own opinion. But if they don't support one type of research, then instead of focusing their energies on bashing it, they should be focusing their energies on supporting the other type. And I think that gets overlooked a lot. And I think it's important to support adult stem cell research.
Thank you.
So, I don't know, and I think that a lot of people, I know a lot of people my age, and I know a lot of people that are your age that we've spoken to, you start to realize that you're probably going to need a lot of this research that is going on in your life at some point later on. And it's almost like a shift in thinking in generations, and that you start to wonder about, you know, lung cancer or other kinds of cancer, and how it can be cured, and how it can be, if God forbid you should know anybody that has it, how they can be helped. And I think that it's just wonderful to see how much progress is being made.
Do you have a target date for walking?
Yes. So no. Well, I do actually. What is it? 2010? Is it going to be 2011? 3 years? Maybe less. Maybe I'll be crawling into. So I'm. If I have strong coffee, maybe soon. Yes.
Your healing just looked like a miracle for me. It was wonderful the way you struggle and get cured. I just wonder when or how did you start to write your book? Did anybody help you to write the book, or you did it yourself?
I'm not a good writer. I'm not. I'm horrible at writing, because I can only write for, at most, 2 hours a day. And then if I write more than that, it's very contrived, and it's just not easy to read, and it wouldn't sound like my voice. So what I did was, first of all, I never thought I could write a book. I just would start to write emails to my friends and to my ex-colleagues, and also to my boss, my ex-boss. And it would be what I did in therapy today. One day, okay, so 1 week, the wheel fell off my wheelchair. And so the email was funny. It wasn't supposed to be funny, but it just came off as funny. I'm like, can you believe the wheel fell off my wheelchair, and insurance is giving me a new wheelchair in 8 months? So, yeah, in 8 months. So I'm like, so I guess I'll crazy glue the wheel back on. Just these very kind of funny stories that are not funny when you're living through it, but you kind of have to, I had to laugh, or else I'd go crazy. So I started to write it, and the emails went from being 2 paragraphs to 5 paragraphs, and I would do them every week. And I remember there were 3 weeks that I skipped these emails, and I didn't realize that the 10 people that I emailed it to would send it to their 10 friends, and then their 10 friends to their 10 friends. And when I skipped those 3 weeks, I got 40 emails that said, "We didn't get your email this week. We didn't get your email last week either. What's going on? Are you okay?" And I was kind of like, "No, I'm fine. I just didn't think anybody wanted to read it." And one day, my ex-boss, Suzanne, she actually became a yoga instructor and taught me breathing techniques and how to breathe again after my injury. But she said, "You know, your emails, if you flesh them out a little bit more, could become chapters in a book." And so I set aside a morning, maybe 3 hours in the morning, and my goal was 2 pages a day. So I wanted it to be, 2 pages a day doesn't seem like a lot, and it can go by very quickly or very slowly sometimes. But 2 pages a day, it adds up to 14 pages a week, and it adds up pretty quickly. And my publisher threw a lot of those pages out when they got them, but luckily they liked a lot of them too. So I just kept a very realistic goal, and I stuck to it, and that's it.
That's great.
Yeah, thank you. It's not a long book, so.
It's inspiring. I had a sister who is a cancer survivor. She got glioblastoma tumor in her brain, but after I read your book, I just called her and explained her that how you can fight for your life. It is. She started feeling that she's getting better, and I think the last MRI she had, the doctor told her that you're getting better. There is no more, increasing in the tumor growth in your brain. And I think the feeling, the spiritual, explanation of the, every person like you can find yourself cured by yourself, I think, not by all the techniques. Physical therapy is one part of the problem. They can help you, but the way you started to get back to your life is very important, and I was so inspired by the way you fight for your life.
Thank you. It doesn't really give my recovery justice for me to be up here alone, because if it wasn't for my family or my friends, then I would definitely be in a nursing home if I was on my own. I would never be able to be here if I were on my own. So there's something to be said about a close-knit family and very good friends and the support system. The way I think being positive helps a lot, but I think that there's a balance between everything. So.
You mentioned your father was a doctor.
Yeah.
Does he not practice holistic medicine, and is that his main field, or did he study that separately from, his other?
He is trained in traditional medicine. He's an MD.
He is.
But he was one of the first homeopathic doctors in the United States. So he does alternative medicine, but it's almost unorthodox the way that he does it, because if you need antibiotics, he gives you antibiotics, but he also gives you the vitamins to supplement your body to stay healthy while you use traditional medications. And he's also a very spiritual kind of person. So his practice is in Neuroshop. So he does a lot of the newest techniques that they do in Switzerland and Germany. And it's, growing up, with my dad, and my mom works with my dad, I had to take 30 vitamins every day. Every day was like a different concoction of vitamins that I had to take. And it actually really helped me out because having grown up in a family of science, I know that there's a sense of fallacy in everyone, even if you're a doctor. But if I hadn't grown up in that environment, and this quote-unquote one of the best surgeons of the country were saying to you, you're going to die tonight, you would probably believe him. Instead, I was kind of like, I don't think you know what you're talking about. So there's a sense of humanity to everything that you have to really keep into account. Yeah, of course, thank you. Yes?
I have to say, your book was one of the most heartwarming books I've read in a long, long time.
Thank you.
And you've given new meaning to Never Say Never. It's just unbelievable.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Yes?
I just think the singing helped. I think that's a big part.
Yeah.
I know for me, I enjoy that. And there was a study with plants, and they did tests, and they used several different types of music, and they found, and there was also a control that they didn't play music for, right? So there was one greenhouse that had like
Mozart.
classical. Yeah, they found Baroque classical music was the best for enhancing growth and vitality in the plants. And in fact,
Yeah.
all musics help because the control that they didn't have any music on grew the least vigorously.
That's so funny because Estee Lauder, they have a skincare line called Creme de la Mer, and it uses algae.
Yeah.
And in all of the labs where they grow the algae, they play Mozart for that reason.
Yeah.
I know way too much about my
The fact that the music is coming out of you too, and you're creating it.
Yeah.
You're vibrating with that. I think
I
that played a role.
I love music because I'm always working, I'm always doing therapy, I'm always doing something. So, I've always loved music. I grew up playing the piano and the viola. So, for me, it's always been another part of my psyche and another part of my being that even if it's on in the background, it's like I always need it there. It's a great source of energy for me. Yeah, you're right.